starting the recording. Thank you for joining us for today's Grants in Aid information session presented by the Office of Grants Management. We're within the Department of Community Services, part of the City and County of Honolulu. Today's presentation will be given by Gabe Niole. That's me. I'm the administrator of the Office of Grants Management, and helping me later on in the presentation will be Shane Akagi, one of the project officers. And he'll be going over the specific details about the budget section related to the proposals. Housekeeping, we'll go over a couple of things about that, but the bulk of today's session will really be related to understanding and going through the documents related to the request for grants proposals. I've structured it to cover the 5 W's about the request for grants proposals, and we'll also go through the other important information contained within the documents. At the end, after I've done told you all I need to tell you about the documents, we'll have a question and answer session, and I'll share more mechanics about that as we move forward. Here's some information on how to use the GoToWebinar Hub. If you're watching the recorded version of this, then you don't really need to know any of this stuff, because this is mostly for live webinars. If you're having issues, you shouldn't have issues with this because this should just be a video if you're watching the recorded version. So I'll fast forward through these sections. Okay, let's stop here for a little bit and talk about the process instructions. The first thing I want to do is kind of give you an overview of what I'll be calling different things. And I'll also show you the documents as I refer to them. So the first document I'll call the RGP, either the thick document or the PDF, and it looks like this. It's 68 pages long, and this is something that you're able to download if you followed the link from any of the press releases or documents we sent out pointing you to our purchasing website. So this is a very the thickest document, and I'll refer to it as the RGP as we go through the presentation. The next document we'll be spending a lot of time looking at today is the Appendix A Word document, and I'll pretty much refer to this as the Word document or the Appendix A. So let me show that on the screen for you, and that document looks like this. We'll be going through this in the order of the 5 W's at first, and then we'll take more time to go through this page by page to show you the things that I think are relevant for you to know. Lastly, we'll look at the Appendix A Excel file, and this should be, for today's session, we'll use the document I emailed out to you before the webinar. So this has sample information included in it. The form is pretty much what you'll have to submit to us, but the sample information will allow one of my colleagues, Shane Akagi, to actually walk you through details about how to fill this form out. So I'm not going to refer to this at all during my session, but when Shane gets on, he's going to spend his entire time talking about this and helping you understand it as best we can. After we go through the documents, the 5 W's, then I'll give you kind of more details about each document, and at the end of that we'll go through and I'll try and answer some of the questions that I see popping up on the screen here. If you have questions, please type them into your control panel at the bottom. There should be a space for you to type in those questions, and then I'll do my best to address them during that section of our webinar. Okay, let's take a look at the 5 W's of the request for grants proposal, starting with who can apply. Hold on while I take a look at my different hard copy documents here. I am kind of old school, so I write stuff down on paper. One, because I don't really know how to annotate things that well electronically. And two, it just seems quicker to me to be able to flip to the hard copy and find what I'm looking for. So you'll hear a bunch of shuffling paper as I go through these things while I get myself oriented and find the notes. So thank you for your patience. Let's take a look at the request for grants proposal, the RGP or the PDF, and we're going to be taking a look at pages 10 and 11 to determine who can apply for these funds. So I'll switch over to that screen, find page 10, and if you go to page 10 on the PDF, look at the bottom. Here's some important information for you to know. Who can apply? The first thing is you need to be, and I'll highlight this, an IRS 501c3 organization. Hopefully you can see that on the screen. That is one of the criteria for applying for grants and aid funds. So part of the application process will be submitting your documentation that shows you are a 501c3. If we move over to page 11, well, another thing you need to be in order to apply for these grants, you shall be chartered and authorized to do business in the state of Hawaii. So you have to make sure you meet this criteria. The last criteria that's included in this section is that number 4, you shall not be in arrears on any financial or other obligation owed to the city. And in order to prove that, we have part of the documentation that you have to submit, a form that you'll need to complete representing this. In addition to this form, the city will also vet your application and determine whether this is true or not. And if it's determined that there's some kind of error, we'll let you know. Worst case scenario, what we will do is you will be disallowed from applying, or we will disqualify your application. So those are the 3 criteria you need to meet in order to apply for the GIA funds. 501c3 organization, grant proposer chartered or authorized to do business in Hawaii, and not in arrears. Remember that information, because coming up soon we're going to be asking you some questions about it. Moving along. What can be funded? We're going to take a look back at the request for grants proposals and go to page 7. So at the bottom of page 7, it provides an overview of the different kinds of activities that can be funded. And really they fall into 2 different categories. So let me scroll up so you can see both of them. This first paragraph kind of gives you the broad definition, and it's really for economically or socially disadvantaged populations or public benefits in the areas of arts, culture, economic development, or the environment. So just like those criteria are divided here in the section I've highlighted, the categories below also represent those 2 different groups. Public services for economically or socially disadvantaged populations, and you see some of the criteria listed here about how those populations are defined. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And then for the second section, public benefit in the arts, in the areas of arts, culture, economic development, or the environment. It's this section that let's see what I can do. I'll point to with my giant yellow pen. So you have to apply for something that affects those different areas. one of those different areas. So that's where you can find this information in the request for grants proposals, or the RGP. If we look at another document, and hold on while I erase my drawings and change my pointer. If we look at the Word document, or the Appendix A, we also see what kind of activities you can apply for. If you look at the top of page 2, which I'm scrolling onto the screen right now. So in the section listed here, it really asks you to choose one type of grant activity in both of these boxes to determine which type of activity you'll be providing. Now, something came up earlier where some people thought they needed to check one box in this to define who they're serving, and then one in this area to define what it is they're doing. But that is not the case. What we expect, let me erase those drawings, is you only get to choose one box out of these whole section. So you're either choosing a public service that's going to serve a different population, or you're choosing one of these arts or culture or different types of activities then you need to check here. You only get the chance to choose one of these boxes. And if you choose more than one box, there may be an opportunity where we may disqualify your application for not following the instructions. So note, please only check one box in this area as you fill out your application. Okay. So that answers the question of let me erase those drawings, what can be funded? Next, let's take a look at where can the funds be used. And I'm going to flip to our request for grants proposals. And we're going to go back to page 11. Hold on while I get there. So here I'm going to use my big yellow pen so you can see this. Really, the project needs to take place within the city and county of Honolulu. We can only fund projects that happen within the city and county of Honolulu. So if you look at RGP, this is the place where it'll tell you where we can fund projects. If we take a look at the Word doc, or the Appendix A, and hold on while I change my drawing tools. If you look at page 1 of this document, you can see where you have to determine where on the island of Oahu you'll be providing these services. And we've divided the island into the 9 city council districts. So we ask that you fill out, if you're serving people in a particular district, click the X in one of these boxes, and then in the space below, enter the number of the amount of the budget you think will be devoted to that district. We ask that all your amounts are whole numbers only, whether they're in the district box or in the total box. But we need to know where your funds will be providing services. And some of the questions we often get are, well, you know, we're open to everyone, so we just want to take our total budget and divide it by 9. And that's one way to go. But one thing that we're looking for is that people do their best job to be as accurate as possible in determining where the funds go, because the way this particular system works, when people are awarded funds, they're awarded funds for specific districts. And if at a later date, council members want to know, hey, what happened to those funds that were awarded to my district? If you just kind of guessed at where you thought people would come from, and your numbers are off, then that could raise an issue at that point in terms of, hey, we gave them money to provide $20,000 worth of services in my district, and that didn't happen. What's going on? So please, when you fill out this part of your application, we ask that you do your best to use previous historical data about the population you've served. If this is something you've done in the past before, use that data to kind of determine, okay, where did the people come from that I served? If you've never done this before and you have a new project, then I ask that you kind of put some thought into, well, where do you think the people will come from based on the kinds of services you're providing? Do your best to try and project what audience you're trying to reach, and do your best to figure out where you think they will come from. So that answers the question of where can funds be used. And I'm going to flip back to our PowerPoint slide. Next thing I wanted to talk about is when. When can you apply for these funds? And the easy answer is right now. Now is the application period. But of course there's more detail to that, so hold on while I get there in our document. Page 3 of the request for grants proposal, or the PDF, you'll see the image scrolling on your screen now. The RGP was released on Friday, October 16th, and now we're in the midst of doing the informational sessions. So I'm scrolling down a little bit more. You have until Monday, November 16th, 2015 at 2 o'clock to submit your grant proposals, and you must submit them to the location that I'm highlighting on the screen right now. So if you've never been to this office building, we highly recommend you do a dry run before you come down, so you kind of figure out where it is, especially if you've never done this before. Sometimes it can be hard to find, and if it's 1:55 and you're trying to find the right place and find parking, it can be a very stressful time. So do your best. What I recommend everybody do is do your best to submit your application early, so you don't have to worry about stressing out at 1:55 and not being able to find parking. If you anticipate, for reasons beyond your control, that you will be coming in a little bit later, I recommend you do some research about where this office is, and when you do come in to drop off the documents, I also recommend a two-person approach. One person drive, one person get out and drop off the car, so you don't have to stress out about the parking. Because if documents are received after 2 o'clock, then we will not be able to accept them. And that's always a challenge for us, as well as for grantees that we've had to turn away in the past. So please make sure you learn ahead of time where you have to go, and make sure you get your documents in before this time. Other couple important things that we're going to have to do, or that are coming up. This Wednesday will be your deadline to submit requests for clarifications. So if you have any questions, submit them at the email address I'll show you a little bit later. And the next week, Friday, November 6th, is the city's last day to issue addenda. And the addenda are pretty much any updates we have, as well as responses to questions that are submitted, whether they're on this format or whether they come through our BFS purchasing at honolulu.gov email, which I'll scroll to right now. So you can see, if you have questions, I'll highlight the section here. If you have questions after this webinar, please send them to this email, the BFS purchasing at honolulu.gov, before the end of the day on October 28th. And what I'll do is I get those questions sent to me, and I compile them into an addenda, and we'll issue the last addenda next week, Friday. So that answers the question of when. When can I apply for these funds? I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint now. Oops. Moving on to how. How do I apply for these funds? I'm going to answer this in kind of two parts. The first part, we'll take a look at the request for grant proposals. And this section will really talk more about form, or what will your final application look like. In the documents you downloaded from our purchasing department or our website, we included two electronic copy documents. One is a Word document, the Appendix A that I've been referring to so far and that you'll become a lot more familiar with as we continue this webinar. And you'll also have to fill out the Appendix A Section 3, which is an Excel sheet, and it's the budget file. It includes the budget and the schedule. So when submitting your application, you'll have to submit hard copies of these documents as well as electronic copies of these documents. In terms of the hard copies, if you look at what's on the screen now, we need one original and then 8 copies to be provided to us, as well as an electronic file of everything. So why do we need so many copies, folks ask? The first one is because we do a lot of different things and a lot of people look at these documents. So let's take a look at the original, which is listed here, hard copies of grants proposals. They're doing some construction in our building, so it sounds like once in a while you might hear some construction noises going on. Apologies for that. If it gets to be too distracting, please raise your hand so you can let me know, and I'll do my best to try and compensate for that noise. In terms of the hard copy, let's talk about the original document. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and let's see, kind of show you what we're looking for. So if you look at the Word doc or Appendix A, at the end of that document, pages 13 and 14, you'll see what looks like actually the screenshots I put on the slide that's on the screen right now. So the one on the left is page 13, the one on the right is page 14. So in the original document that we'll need from you, you'll need to include all of the documents that are circled in red on the screen. So in your one original document you'll submit to us, it'll include all of these documents that are circled in red. And this is for folks who are not doing fiscal sponsorships. I forgot to ask this question, so I'll ask it now. Is anyone out there doing or intending to apply via a fiscal sponsorship for this? If you are, please raise your hand if you're going to apply for a fiscal sponsorship. Okay, there's one person so far. I'll let that hang in a little bit. Okay, a couple. We have a couple people that are applying. So if you're applying for the fiscal sponsorship or through a fiscal sponsorship, you need to submit documents that are not circled, that are underneath the circled sections. So for the document on the left, it'll be these numbers, and let me draw here as well as here for the original. So you need to submit the sections that I just highlighted in yellow. For people that are not, and I'm going to put everybody's hands down now. For people that are not applying via fiscal sponsorships, your one original needs to just include the documents in red. Now, for the copies, hold on, let me turn this off. We need 8 copies, and in your copies, you just need to submit the documents that are circled in blue on your screen right now. And then if you're doing fiscal sponsorships, you need to submit the documents I just highlighted in yellow. So this will be 8 copies of these documents in addition to the hard copy of the Appendix A Word document and the Appendix A Excel sheets. All of these things will be included in your 8 copies. And why 8 copies? 7 of the copies are for our 7 grants and aid commissioners. And then we have 1 left over just in case somebody spills something on their documents and they are no longer readable. So it's happened before. Hopefully it doesn't happen again, but just in case, we'll be prepared and we'll be able to give them the information they need to complete their scoring. Let me erase that and I'll go back to the other slide. Okay, so that pretty much shows you the format. And let me go back to the request for grants proposal, the RGP. The format and the 9 copies or the 9 packets we'll need. And then what I'm showing on the screen now is kind of a picture of what each copy should look like, bound in these folders. We encourage people to give us double-sided pages so we can save on the amount of paper that's going towards this project. And we also ask that each section is tabbed as noted here in the request for grants proposals. Please do not submit them in 3-ring binders, and the reason for that is because each commissioner typically has to review 120 to 130 of these. And when you put them in binders, that just takes up more space and makes for more boxes that they have to lug back and forth. So we found that these bound folders work a lot better. They're a lot skinnier, a lot easier to move around. And if you want to save some money and you have a little bit of time, you need some of these covers, you can come by our office, which I'm highlighting on the screen now, and pick up free leftovers we have from last year. After we did our review and scanned these documents, we disassembled them. Actually, one of our staff disassembled them, and she boxed them near the front door of our office. So if you want to pick up some free folders for yourself, please come by. They're available on a first-come, first-served basis at our offices with the highlighted information that's on the screen right now. I saw that the boxes, looks like they still have some stuff in them this morning, so first-come, first-served. And if you want to save some money, please feel free to do that. Scrolling down the screen, we also need electronic versions of the application. And we need you to include this with the original. So we ask that you put a copy of all of the documents that are included in the hard copy attached as PDF files. And we ask that each document be labeled separately. And really this is because sometimes in our electronic discussion about these documents with commissioners and other city folks while we do our review, we just need to submit one part of it for people to double check, and it gets hard to do if we have to go through giant PDF files and look for the documents we're trying to review. So we ask that you follow the instructions listed in section 2 that's on your screen right now, and I'm going to show you what example of somebody who has good files on their thumb drive, what that should look like. So if you look at the screen, you'll see all of the different documents listed. Here's the Appendix A Word document that I highlighted. Here's the Excel sheet that I highlighted, and these will be filled in with your information. And if we go down, you can see all of these different documents reflect what's included on pages 13 and 14 of your Appendix A. And just to show you kind of what I'm talking about in a little more detail, let me take a look at page 13. So the naming convention we're using is pretty much following the naming convention that's in the section 6 of your Appendix A. So Roman numeral 6.1 A1 would be your IRS revenue, your IRS tax exemption letter. 6.1.A.2 would be this one, and so forth. .3, .4, .5. So that's how we ask you to name the files. I'll switch back to the screenshot of the listing. Get rid of the drawing so you can see that. And see, I don't know how to make that bigger. But you can see here in the listing that everything follows that naming convention. And you can also see that the sample I put on the screen really has the fiscal sponsorship documents included as well. So most of you who are not doing fiscal sponsorships won't have this many documents, but they should be singled out like this. So that answers the question of what it should look like in terms of your hard copies and your electronic copies that you submit to us. Let me go back to the RGP. So we also ask that when you submit your electronic version, please attach that to the original folder. So just tape it on there, or put it in an envelope. Some people staple it onto the folder. Just attach it in some way that it's pretty secure and won't fall off, so we can find it pretty easily and do what we need to do during our compliance review. So that answers the questions about the form. What should it look like? The other, probably most important part of the application is, how do you get the points? How do you get the points? But before we go there, let's test how well I've been doing in pointing out the important things as well as your retention by going through some quizzes. I'm going to show you on the screen. You should be able to see a question. Who can apply for GIA funds? So click the appropriate response on your screen. They'll come over to me. People are doing them already. And once I get a good amount of responses, I'll come back and let you guys know what the responses are. So we're up to about 68% now. I'm going to shut off my microphone for about 30 seconds, and I'll be back shortly. Okay, I am back. I'm going to close the poll and show the results coming up. So who can apply? The answers are correct. 501c3 nonprofit orgs, as well as businesses that are chartered to do business, actually nonprofits that are chartered to do business in Honolulu. Let's take a look at the next poll. And I'll give you guys 30 seconds to answer the following question. What kind of activities can be funded? Please select all that apply. I'm going to go off microphone for a little bit, and I'll be back in about a minute. Okay, I am back, and I'm going to close the poll and let you guys take a look at the results. So what kind of activities can be funded? The key is you have to read the request for grants proposals. However, we do look for something that will help people, which is the response to number one, as well as projects that make a difference. Both of those things fit into the scoring that we've put into the request for grant proposal process. So they're all correct answers, with you have to read the RGP to be the most correct one. I'm going to hide the responses at this point and do one more question before I continue on with the webinar. Where can funds be used? I'll give you guys a minute to answer that, and then I'll come back and show you the results. Okay, I'm back. I'll share the results. Where can funds be used? Yes, they must be used in Honolulu, anywhere in Honolulu, which is the island of Oahu. So thank you guys for checking out those questions. Looks like everybody's tracking pretty well with the presentation so far. I'm going to take this time now to pick back up with the PowerPoint and move along to the section about how do I get points. So I'll start by taking a look at the request for grants proposals on pages 18 through 20. Excuse me. Page 18 is where we see the evaluation criteria. And what I'd like you guys to do, if you have both of the hard copy documents or if you have both the electronic documents, and by documents I'm referring to the PDF or the RGP that's on the screen now, and the Word document or the Appendix A that's on the screen now, I'd like you to kind of match those documents up next to each other. So from the Appendix A, show you where I want you to stop. On page 5, we'll start there. And then in the request for grants proposals, if you can take a look at page 18. And I have a slide about this, which I'm going to show you very shortly. Okay, not this one. We already done that. But if you can compare these two documents that I have on the screen, request for grants proposal or the PDF on the left, Appendix A on the right, and how we've structured this process is the scoring criteria from the RGP pretty much matches the same alpha and numbering in the Appendix A Word document. So if you see, let me use my highlighter to show this. A1 kind of matches with A1 here. Same with 2. A2 matches here. B1 matches here. And some folks kind of notice, hey, what's this other box? Provide a description of the grant activity that I just circled, which doesn't have a A1 or B1. Well, what's this box doing here? In kind of my overview of the total application packet, it seemed that without this box in the Word doc, people don't get as clear a picture about what the overall activities are that are being funded. So I added this as a matter of continuity, I guess, for our commissioners to help them get the clearest picture of what it is that you're proposing in your application. So at this time, I recommend that you take a look at your two documents, the RGP and the Appendix A, and kind of compare them side by side, whether you have hard copy or electronic copy, and see how all of those things match up, as well as see the point values assigned to each one of the boxes, because that is the kind of stuff you'll need to know to figure out how to best spend your time on certain areas and which areas have the biggest impact on your overall scores. So I'll give you guys a minute to take a look at that, and I'm going to go off microphone, and I'll come back afterwards to walk you through a little more specifics in the Appendix A document. Okay, I have returned, and now that you kind of see how you get your points, it's basically by filling in the Appendix A, which I'm going to click to once I erase my drawings and change my pointer. The document I have on the screen now, which is your Appendix A, is pretty much what will provide the information for the commissioners to decide how many points to give you. So the best thing you can do is spend your time answering these questions concisely as well as clearly, in providing people some feedback for how to improve applications. One of the things I've noted in many applications is that sometimes in the midst of writing and doing your best to gather all the information related to the question, the actual answer for the question kind of gets lost, either in the details of all the different technical knowledge you have, or sometimes just in trying to compile all the pieces, it's not easy to find the answer to the question. So something I highly recommend is taking a quick look at this once you've done your best to fill in the answers, to just go back to the question and say, would a not normal, but person off the street, kind of typical person who's not in my industry, would they be able to get the information they need to give me the points that I'm requesting? So it's just a helpful thing to do before you finish up your application and submit them to us. You know, in the Appendix A, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the beginning of the document and kind of just do a page-by-page review of the important parts I think you should pay attention to. So let's go from the beginning. And I'll use my highlighter to kind of guide you through the different steps or the different areas I think you should pay attention to. Okay, so for E, which is briefly describe the grant activity and need being filled, that I've arrowed on my screen. This content here is used, we pretty much copy and paste this into an executive summary that the commissioners read, as well as when we submit the report to the City Council, that executive summary document is included, and it's all based on what every applicant puts in this box. So it's something you guys really need to be clear in describing your activity as well as the need being filled. If you look at box F, one of the things that we've seen in the past is in terms of summarizing grant activity outcomes, some people have the philosophy of more is better, and in most things that's true, but sometimes more can be more confusing and make things not as clear. One of the challenges for this grant too is once we implement, we hold people accountable to meet all the outcomes and measures that they include in their application. And if they don't get all the funds that they were awarded, pretty much because we are allowing the grant application to set the expectation of what goals will need to be met. So in this section, we really ask, when you tell us about your outcomes, you simplify and you do realistic projections of what you expect to be able to do if you're awarded the funds. Something to consider as you complete your applications. Continuing onward, let me change my tools and scroll down to the next page. So we've already talked about this page in terms of what your grant activity should be. Only pick one of these, the one that best fits your activity. At the bottom of this page, something kind of innocuous, but very important. One, you have to make sure that the right person signs this, and that in your original, we actually get an original signature. Because without that, the application is not valid. And in terms of who should sign this, let me clear that. Who should be signing in this space? It should be the person that is named on the next page. And that is named, hold on while I grab my highlighter, in this section here. The person who appeared and who's notarized to be able to sign. So only that person can sign the preceding page. Something new we've added this year, we talked about it a little bit earlier, you have to certify that your organization is not in arrears with the city. So you need to include that when you submit your application to us as well. Continuing onward, let me change my tools. Page 4 of the application is for the fiscal sponsors folks. You have to fill out all of this information here. And a word of caution for fiscal sponsors. It's a very difficult partnership to successfully implement. So I recommend you really have kind of a heart-to-heart with the fiscal sponsor and have clear expectations for both parties. Because I think in the fiscal sponsorships we've seen in practice here, we run into, most of them have had issues which result in non-payment, underperformance, misunderstandings. So this is really a tough thing to do, but it can be done. I just recommend a lot of caution and a lot of preparation before you engage in this, because it's difficult to do. Okay, moving on to the next page. Here's where we started your comparison about points. Some information that people have asked for before. Some folks have said, hey, A1, A2, seems like you're asking for the same thing in those boxes. So here's how we differentiate what's in A1 and what's in A2. A1 is more about the type of data you're submitting, as well as the quality of data, because you're looking for substantive data, quality information that shows it's a priority need. So we're looking at the type and quality of information in A1. A2, what we're really looking for is a thorough analysis of the data. So after you collected the data, kind of what do you say, how do you analyze it to kind of show that whatever you're proposing to do, well, actually that there's a need in the community and it's a priority need. So that's some helpful information about what to fill in with those boxes. Now, something also to be aware of is that when you're serving the public services target, it's important to include data about why that public service target is a vulnerable population. One thing we've discovered is that just because people are seniors does not necessarily mean they are vulnerable, although some are and some are not. Same thing with children. Just because some folks are children, it doesn't necessarily mean they are vulnerable children. So in your needs section, please make sure you draw a clear connection to how your target, if you're offering public services, how your target is vulnerable. If you're applying under the other category, arts, culture, community, economic development, let me clear some of this stuff to make it a little more clear. If you're applying under these type of activities, please make sure that you are able to justify how your activities are supporting low to moderate income areas, because that is an important criteria in terms of reaching out to those different activity types. All right, let's move along to erase the drawings, change the tool. In section B, this is pretty straightforward. We do ask that in B2, when you fill this out, first sentence, we really want to know how many people are you going to help. If you're doing arts, culture, community, we really want to know how's your activity going to support sustainable improvement in these areas. So the easier it is for commissioners to find the answer to these questions, the clearer it is and the more helpful it is. They're able to give you points accordingly. Let's move along to the next page. Top of page 6. Okay, we're going to take a break from listening to me, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Shane Akagi, who's going to tell you more about the budget worksheet. So hold on while I turn this over to Shane. And then I will, as soon as he pops up, I will mute my microphone. Take it away, Shane.
Thanks, Gabe. Let's see if we can do this. Can you, all of you that have never been to one of the city and county's grant and aid information sessions, raise your hand, and that will be on the panel. If you're listening to the recording, that doesn't apply to you, so just continue listening. But for those of you that are on live now, if you can just raise your hand, that'd be helpful. Thank you. And having a few problems. Hold on 1 second while I mute you. Okay, it looks like about a third of you have never been to one of our information sessions before. So let me give you a little bit of information about the way our grant works. You may be used to corporation or foundation grants, the kind where you get 90% of your funds up front after you're awarded, and you get 10% at the end. Our grant actually doesn't work that way. Our grant actually is a deliverable-based reimbursement grant. So what that means is every month you tell us what you're going to do in terms of deliverables. You incur expenses as it's related to those deliverables, and then we pay you for them after the expenses have been incurred. So every month you provide to us deliverables, how much it costs to provide those services or deliverables, and we pay you after the fact. So it's a lot different from what you may be used to in terms of the types of grants you get or you've gotten before. So let's start off by taking a look at the spreadsheet that was emailed out to you earlier today, and also if you can take a look at it, it's based off of, it's a sample form based off of a hypothetical organization called ABC Childcare, and it's based off of the two sheets that you'll be filling out for your grant in Section A. Section A3, the budget, and Section A4, the deliverable schedule. If you're awarded the grant, these two documents become the primary governing document for your grant. So it's very important, even during the application process, to fill these forms out as best as you can. So let's take a look at page 1, Section 3, the budget. There's two sections to this budget section. There's Section 1, which talks about a preliminary budget, and that's the part that has city funds, secured or pending other funds. And at the bottom, it asks where you're receiving those funds for. And then we'll go into Section 2 of the budget, which is a more detailed breakdown of the funds. Okay, let me open up with a drawing tool. As you can see, ABC Childcare has filled in their name here, described what their grant activity is going to be here, and the date of the grant. Now, if you notice on the form, there's one section for city funds requested. That one column is self-filling from Section 2. So as you fill out Section 2, this section here fills out by itself because it's formula. All the blue sections, or the blue ink colored sections, are places that you would be filling in. So let's scroll down on the page a little bit. Now you're probably asking, why is it important that the city knows what our funding sources are, or where your sources of funding is? Very good question, but it is important because in terms of income, the grant is designed so it's that you don't make money off of the city funds. In other words, if city funds go to pay for something, it shouldn't be what they call double dipping, where another source of fund goes to pay for the same thing and money can goes into reserve or something. So that's why it's kind of important to fill this out as accurately as you can. So for ABC Childcare, you notice that their total overall budget for the program they're funding is $204, which is seen here. But the amount they're requesting from the city is this amount here, $124,000. They're expecting State of Hawaii grant and aid of $60,000, which is this over here, which they've gotten. Then they also have pending funding sources like a foundation grant for $20,000 here. Let me clear this out. And it's important to fill this out again because also if you're awarded the grant, it's especially important that we know that there's no, like we said, double dipping going on. Let me change my drawing tool. And you'd fill that out in this section and this section. Again, for the city fund section that you're applying for this grant, that's just this section here. And that is a formulated section. So let's move on to Section 2, the detailed budget. And let me erase the drawing. If you look in the first section, section 2, it's a section for salaries and wages for direct program related items. And also there's a section for salaries and wages for administrative positions, which is this section here. Now the reason why there's two sections is this grant has a ceiling of 25% of total grant funds requested for administrative salaried positions or salaries and benefits. So let's take a look at what ABC Childcare asked for. In their proposal here, they're asking for 3 direct service positions, a case manager at half-time, a facilitator case manager for 3/4 of the time, and 1 full-time program coordinator. And if you notice, their salaries are actually their full amount of the salaries. But because the amount allocated to the GIA is a formula section, what it'll do is take into account the amount of time that is allocated to the grant versus the full salary, and it'll give you what the person can expect in a total year. So if you notice, the facilitator case manager makes $4,000 a month, and even though they're funded for a full year, it's only for 3/4 of the time. Therefore, the amount allocated to the GIA is only $36,000. The fringe benefits section, there's a couple areas open here in other, and what that is in case you have payroll, taxes, or any other items you want to add in, you can add into this section here or put into the numbers direct cost area in this section here. Or sorry, other costs other than payroll taxes, like if you have a staffing agency. Payroll taxes can actually be put in over here. Again, remember that blue highlighted sections are those that you can fill in. So if you have different percentages that are tied into FICA, or if you put in state uninsured insurance and this rate changes, it'll affect the formula here. So one thing I did want to point out about this is that total salaries comes from this area here. So it's a formula section again. And it'll calculate out what your payroll taxes or FICA or state uninsured will be right here. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out for you was the health care. If you're providing health care for your employees, you can put in the total amount per employee here and the total months here. But if you notice, 365 times 12 doesn't exactly equal out to $9,000. And the reason for that is this formula takes into account the amount of full-time FTEs or full-time equivalents that you have funding the grant, because it doesn't make sense if a person's only working half-time on the grant and you go ahead and charge their full health care to the grant. And that's why that's a formulated section. So keep that in mind as you're filling this out. The administrative services, administrative or supervisory positions, ABC Childcare has 2, an executive director who's working on the program for 5% of the time, and an intake clerk who works on the program at 1% of the time. Again, put in their actual total salaries here, and the formula here will resolve out what the total amount of your, what the total amount allocated to the grant will be here. The fringe benefits, just like in the direct service area, will then also follow the direct service positions formulas here, so it'll calculate out to you total benefits as well, this section. Now, as you take a look further down on the form, you'll notice there'll be sections for contractual services, professional services. For ABC Childcare, they have an accounting agency, XYZ CPAs, which will be charging $2,000 throughout the life of the grant, and a bi-monthly event which is catered or provided by Fun Time Events for a total of $1,000 during the year that they can use for the life of the grant. Section D, equipment purchases. If you notice, the disclaimer here is only if the cost is greater than $5,000 per unit. So if you're buying a $1,000 laptop, this is not the section you'd put it in. You'd put it in Section E under one of the other fillable sections. Section D would be things like if you decide to buy a vehicle, and we've had vehicles charged this grant before. If you decide to buy vehicles or other types of expensive equipment, we've had water pumps and whatnot, large-scale water pumps charged the grant as well. And this is where you fill it out. And again, if it's greater than $5,000 per unit. Now, if you took a look at Section E, there's some pre-filled areas: office rent, utilities, security, consumable office supplies, mileage, program supplies. One thing I'd like to caution you about is in this program supplies column, if you're going to charge the grant for program supplies, please be really specific about what kind of things goes in here. Some our colleagues in our budget and fiscal area is very stringent about that, and there's very specific guidelines that they follow. So if you have it in your budget, please make sure that you be as specific as you can in this one section here. Other items you might see: mileage and postage, travel, conference training, telecommunications, and indirect costs. Now, indirect costs can be charged to the grant. However, there is a limit of 5% of the total grant funds requested. So you can only charge 5% of the total. And as you see, ABC Child Care charges $500 a month for $6,000 total. Other over here, we've already kind of pre-filled out stuff for you. ABC Child Care has a laptop computer at $1,500. And again, because it's less than $5,000, it would come here in this section here. Oh, let me switch to my drawing tool and scroll down. At the very bottom, what we've done for you is, again, because the grant has certain limitations, like 25% of the total grant funds can be used for administrative positions and only 5% can be used for indirect, we've calculated out for you what the amount should be, and it'll compare it against what you're charging to the grant. So for example, if we look at indirect costs, 5% of $124,417 is $6,221. ABC Child Care asks for $6,000, so the form itself will tell you as you're filling it out that it's within the 5% limit and that this number is accurate by saying correct. If it wasn't accurate, it'd come out with a formula here that says division by 0, and it would say outside the limit versus inside the limit. And it'll also take a look at your admin costs, so keep that in mind, and that should help you there. Okay, let me clear my drawings, and then we'll switch over to section 4, the schedule of deliverable activities. Now, what this does is, remember as I said earlier in the training that our grant is a deliverable-based reimbursement program. Well, this is the section that you'll be telling us month by month what you're going to be providing to the city to be reimbursed. For ABC Child Care, they decided that they would have number of classes held, number of children served, as well as information sessions at the school. So they're going to schools outside of child care, ABC Child Care, and trying to recruit students or educate teachers about what they're about. If you can see, they've calculated they'll be doing about 2 classes a month for a total of 24 in the year. And if you notice, the one thing about the number of children served, it varies. So what they probably did was go back in look at their history and see what months there might actually be variances. Maybe it's spring break, maybe it's summer, so the volume of students might go down. But they've said overall they're probably going to be able to serve 305 throughout the year. And then information sessions, 2 every month, except for January when they said 22. And this could be true because they could be recruiting during summer, going out and recruiting. So they have a total of 44 classes throughout the year. What I'd also like to point out to you is as you fill out these blue sections and what your deliverables are, this section here will fill out what your deliverables in. So it ties in directly from up here. And right next to it is a section where will describe to us what kind of substantiating documents you will provide to prove to the city that you've actually provided those services. So for ABC Childcare, the number of classes held, they have sign-in sheets. For Children Served, they have class sign-in sheets, and they'll take a look at how many children were in those classes by using the sign-in sheets. And also information sessions at schools. Now, one of the issues we have is with self-reporting of documentation. So what this ABC Childcare decided to do was, for each of the schools they go to, they'll have somebody at the school as a third-party, neutral party, verify that they've actually conducted they've actually did the service. So the school's third-party confirmation is here. So again, the importance of these two documents is that if you're awarded grant funds, these two documents become the governing documents of your grant. The deliverables tell us what you're going to provide to the city every month, and the budget tells us what you're going to be spending that money on. So it's important that as best you can, you estimate correctly and to the best of your ability the type of expenses you'll have, as well as what can you provide that you're providing those services to the city. Okay, if you have any questions, again, you can type them in and we'll try to answer them at the end, or you can email the Department of Purchasing. And at this time, I'm going to hand the session back to Gabe.
Thanks, Shane. Great job in explaining the detailed budget form as well as the schedule form. As soon as I get the controls back, I will point you guys back to our Appendix A Word document where we left off, top of page 6, so we can talk about okay. We should be coming back any moment. Hold on while I make sure I'm clicking the right thing. And for some reason, the next screen is not popping up. Let me fuss around with the controls a little bit, see if I can get it to show up. Okay, that's not working. Let's try something else. Hold on while I try a different approach here. Let's see how this works. Show my screen 1. Still shows like nothing's popping up. I'm going to go off microphone for a little bit while I try and figure this out. I'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, I'm still having some issues with my screen, so let's see if asking you guys questions works. So let's take a look at this question, and please click on the appropriate place. If you cannot see the poll questions on your screen now, please raise your hand. If you cannot see the poll questions, should be, when is the deadline to apply? Okay, Tanya cannot see. I'm going to click off my microphone for a little bit, let you folks answer. Okay, it seems like most people are able to see. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So pretty much 98% of the folks got it right. You can turn it in before 2 o'clock, November 16th. Move on to the next question while I hide those results. Take a look at this. I'll be back shortly. Okay, I am back. Let's close the question and show you guys the results. So the top 3 questions actually look like correct answers. Please read the RGP to figure out how you get the points, fill out the right forms, and also show you didn't get city funds in the past. The last answer, be really nice to Gabe, is always appreciated but not required to get you any points. So thank you guys for participating. I'm going to hide the results, and then I'm going to click off my microphone while I test one more technical thing just to see if I got things working or not. I'll be back in about a minute. Testing, 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 testing. Okay, I was having some technical difficulties. Hold on while I... Hold on while I bring up the right documents. All right. Wow, this looks definitely different. Okay, so my PowerPoint's not working, which is not the greatest, but oh well. But hopefully you guys can hear me. Then I lost my control panel hub too. So I'm not sure what's going on out there, but I'll do the best with the information that I have. So let's continue going through our Appendix A. Let me open mine. So sorry for the technical difficulties. All right, here we are back at the correct place. And top of page 6. So Shane talked with you about the budget narrative in the budget form. And for this question, number 4, I'm going to use my drawing tools here. Okay, so for this question, what we'd like you to do is fill in information that might help us understand things about the budget that aren't readily apparent from the numbers. Like if you have a large budget item that's peculiar to your particular activity. For example, one of our grantees pays a lot of funds or pays a significant amount of funds to taxi fare to transport their clients back and forth. And that kind of rose some questions amongst folks here about, that's kind of a large taxi bill, what's it going for? But once we understood it better, we could understand why they needed to use taxis to transport people. So if you have anything like that in your budget that, from a person who doesn't know anything about what you do, might raise some questions or have people asking questions, you can include a narrative here to help us understand that a little bit better. Same thing with number 5. If you have something about your timeline that doesn't quite stand out as that's why things would happen. For example, if you operate on a school-based calendar, so there'll be certain months where things are happening and certain months where things aren't happening. Filling in a narrative about your timeline can be very helpful for making sure we get the clearest picture about what you're trying to do. Section C is really all about the past, what you've done successfully in the past. C1 gives us data that demonstrates proven success in offering the same or similar or related activities. C2 gives us the chance to show you, gives you the chance to show us how you've able to successfully complete or achieve your objectives or your outcomes in the past. Section 2 also, in case you're trying to do something that's new or you haven't done before, it gives you the chance to show us how you have acquired capacity to do new things in the past. So Section 2 is kind of a either or. If you've done it before, you can tell us about that. If you haven't done the specific thing before, then you can tell us about how you were able to successfully do something new before. And in responding to another question in section 2, please make sure you include all of this information that I'll circle here. Hopefully you can see that. Let me change my tools and I'll keep moving down the screen. So D is all about sustainability and how you can continue the program after 12 months of funding. So give us a plan as well as your capacity and resources to follow the plan. Pretty straightforward. Let me change my tools, erase my screen, move on to the next page. Okay, so page 7. This one is something that is a little bit different than we've done in the past. And it's really based on the language that I'll highlight here. If you've never gotten city funds before, this is a chance for you to kind of tell us about it and get rewarded with points because of that. So to see this a little bit more clearly, I'll flip back to the request for grants proposals, and we'll go to the page that has this specific info. Hold on while I change my drawing tools. So if you look at page 19, actually page 20. No, I will correct myself. If you look at page 18 and 19, and I'll show you this on the screen, you'll notice that each of these pages has a green section, which we've called criteria points. So A has criteria points, B has criteria points at the bottom of the screen right now. Go to page 19, same thing. We see more criteria points for C, criteria points for D. And then at the bottom of page 19, you'll see there's a subtotal for your criteria points. So we'll use this number that I've shaded, and I'll blow this up so you can see it better. Make it a little bit bigger. So we'll use this number, and really that's the number that we'll add the percentage to when you look at section E. So section E says if you've never received any funding from the city within the last 3 years, you get 10%. So let's say you had 85 points up here in section, your subtotal criteria points. The max you can get is 90, but let's say you had 85. So if you didn't get any funding from the city within the last 3 years, you would add 10%, which is 8.5, and then your subtotal would be 85 plus 8.5, and you get 93.5 points. If you received up to 2 awards, then you get 7%, which for 85 would be 5.95 points. You get that added to 85, so your subtotal is now 90.95 points. And you go down the line with descending amount of percentage for not getting funds until you get 0% if you got 10 or more awards. So some of the questions that have popped up are, is this just city funds or is it federal funds that pass through the city? And the answer to the question is yes. Anytime the city has a contract with you, that's what we're talking about in terms of these things. So when you look at Appendix A, which I'll flip to now, below this section E, we have the opportunity for you to fill out all your different grants or contracts that you have received from the city. whether it is city funds or federal funds that come through the city. Another question that popped up in previous webinars is, what if we received funds for fiscal year 14 and then we got fiscal year FY14.2 funds? Are those one grant activity or two? And the answer to that one was they are two grant activities. So that's something a little bit different that we haven't done in the past. But we will review this information and double check it with the data we have at the city and verify that. If we find that there were errors on your part, we'll ask questions about that. Worst case scenario, because the form was not filled out completely correct, you may be disqualified. But we'll give you more information about that once we cross that bridge in terms of reviewing applications. Continuing on in the Appendix A, I'm going to scroll down a few pages. Let's go to Section 5, and this is the grantee information. So this is especially important if because we use this information you provide on this page to check your compliance with the criteria set forth in the request for grant proposal. And also we use this information to contact people if we have questions during our review period. So important to make sure we get the right information here for our compliance check as well as for our contact info. And then the last, if you're doing a fiscal sponsorship, then you need to make sure you fill out page 12 as well. Then I think we spent enough time talking about Section 6, the required attachments. So make sure you attach the relevant forms. And one thing you can do with these pages is use them as check boxes. So if you use a checkbox when you're assembling your application, you can just check off one of these when you make sure you have that document in your pile of things to assemble. Very helpful to make sure you got everything you need. And this is one of the things I use when we do our compliance check, just to make sure we got everything that we needed from you. So that's it for the Appendix A review. I'm going to clear my screen and change my tools so I can switch over to the request for grants proposals. So let me change to that document hard copy, and I'll point out the things that I think are relevant. And I'm running out of time, so I'll have to go quickly because of my technical difficulties. If you take a look at page 5 on your request for grants proposals, there's a section about clarifications and inquiries, which I've scrolled to on the screen. So I've already mentioned this, but I'll tell you again just to make sure. If you have questions after this webinar, please make sure you email them to our purchasing department at bfspurchasing@honolulu.gov. Once we get that, as long as it's before the end of business on Wednesday, the 28th, we'll respond in our addenda. Let me change tools, clear screen. We'll move on to the next relevant section. Top of the next page, page 6. This gives you an overview of what happens after the application process. I'll point out a couple important dates. After your applications are submitted on November 16th, between then and January, the DCS staff will take a look at your documents and do a compliance check to make sure we have everything we need. If we have questions, we'll contact you and let you know how to proceed. In January, at the beginning of January, we need to submit all the applications to our commission, and between January and February, they will review the documents, come up with their own questions, and then assign points and make recommendations for grant awards. They need to get that to the City Council by March 4th. The City will make the final selection and approval of grant awards as part of the budget process, and that usually happens in June. Once the next budget cycle starts in July, then we need to work with the people who are awarded funds so we can encumber the funds by August 15th and try and issue notices to proceed by September 15th. We anticipate the grant period for these funds to start in October 1st or on October 1st, 2016, and to end on September 30th, 2017. Let me clear the document, and I'll keep moving forward. Okay. Let's jump over to page 12. And wanted to point this out to you. Actually, I don't need to use this. So section 10 of the RGP shows that it's the City Council that ultimately selects the grant proposals that will be funded. And like I said earlier, that process happens within the budget for the next fiscal year. In the past, the Council has, for the most part, relied upon the Commission's scores to assign funds. In some years, they have just agreed with the Commission's recommendations and funded exactly what the Commission requested. In other years, they have gone in and made some adjustments. So the City Council are the ones who, at the end of the day, have the final say. Section 11 is about the grant agreement, and why this is important is if you are awarded funds, then the grant agreement is what will bind you and the city together, and we've included that at the back of the RGP. So I'm not going to go over it specifically, but if you've never done this before, I really recommend you take a look at that because it sets out the expectations that the city has for you, and there are a lot of strengths, so it's important to know that before you decide how you want to proceed. If we go down to the bottom of page 12, there's a whole section on fiscal sponsorships. So if you are going to engage in a fiscal sponsorship, I highly recommend you do a detailed review of this section. Let me move on to the next section. Okay, if you go to page 21 of the RGP that I've just flipped to, there's a frequently asked questions section. And it starts off with some things that are pretty straightforward. I saw one of the questions is, where do I find my vendor compliance? So it's right here on page 21. It gives you a link to how to get to the place where you can find it. But since I've been doing this, I notice people ask very similar questions every year. So on page 22, I've included a lot of the questions that were asked last year. And we took out the ones that no longer apply. But if you really want to know the nuts and bolts of the GIA application process, this is a great place for you to review. And we also made the document searchable. So if you just go Control F and type in something you're looking for, Let's say one thing people often ask about is indirect costs. I'll just put in indirect, hit search, and we'll see. Okay, there we go. So then we can find some information about indirect costs. Use that with other keywords in the FAQ section. It'll help you get through it a bunch quicker than actually reading it all. But the answer to most of the questions I've seen so far are included in this section. And I think, let me double check my hard copy to make sure I didn't skip anything. I think that will conclude our talking part of the information session. Yes, I think I've let you know about everything you need to know. So I'm going to take a moment now to answer some of the questions that have come in so far. And the most recent questions I won't be able to answer because I'm having computer difficulties. So I'll read these out loud, and you can write down the notes response to your question, but that'll be coming out soon. So, okay, I heard somebody call my name, but that stopped. Yes.
The organizers book popped up, so you can actually see questions.
Not yet. Oh, there we go. Cool. But I have old ones already. Thanks. All right. So let me get to some of the older questions we have. One of the things people asked, are there available samples of funded proposals? We'll include that in our next addenda. Probably a link to samples of the high scoring ones. I got several questions about can we include photographs or a program, articles, letters of support. Yes, you may include them, but the commissioners will only need to review the required documents that are listed in the request for grants proposal. So although you submit them, it's not guaranteed that commissioners will read all of those documents. And one of the challenges for our commissioners is that typically they look at 130 of these, and they do it after work on a volunteer basis. So it's not for a matter of willingness, but it is kind of a capacity question. 10 o'clock at night, it's pretty late, and they're getting to doing this stuff after they've done all the other things they needed to do. So they may not necessarily review your documents. And having said that, you know, it's up to you whether you want to put the effort into sticking it in there for something that may or may not be reviewed. Somebody asked for a link to the recording of this session. I will include that with the addenda and figure out a way to get a word out about that. Somebody asks, on the RGP, can you define how to respond to funding or any form of assistance from the city and county of Honolulu? If an agency receives state or federal funds through the city, does this count? And the answer to that question is yes. In the RGP or in your application in the Appendix A, you need to put every time you get a contract from the city, whether it's city funds or pass-through funds from the state or the feds, they will be counted as city assistance. On page 2 of Appendix D, it says the grantee must submit yearly program reports on the use of a grant asset. For how many years after the grant year will this be required? So if somebody's looking forward into the grant agreement, and I will say that the response for that is if you do purchase a grant asset with grant funds, we'll expect annual reports for 5 years. So the first year will be while you are funded, and the other 4 years will be after the funding ends. You'll have, in the 4 years I'm talking about, then you'll have to do one report at the calendar end of every year. Another question, if you have a project that meets both of these criteria, do it have to assign it to one or the other? So I believe the criteria this question is referring to is contained in the Appendix A, page 2. Let me show that on the screen. So I believe it's the section I put on the screen now. There are several questions about this. What if we serve multiple populations? What if we serve a bunch of different groups? Because we ask you to pick one category, then we really ask you to pick the category that you feel best meets the heart of your program. So for some people, it'll be a tough choice, but you know the most about your programs, so we'll have to rely on your judgment to figure out which is the best box to choose. What age do we define senior as? Currently researching that question. We'll include a response in the addenda. Can we mail the grant proposal? Yes, you may, but you may mail it to the address listed in the request for grants proposal. However, if something goes wrong with the post office or the delivery service, the city is not responsible for that. The main thing is that the documents get to the purchasing office before the deadline. Let me read through a couple other questions that I can answer. Somebody asks, does the substantive data need to be data collected by your organization? The response to that is no. The data can be something that's from a public source or any other research that is relevant to the activity that you're proposing. And let me see what other questions we have. We are in the process of getting our 501c3 status. And given the deadline, we may not have it when we submit our application. Can we submit something if that change happens? Or if the grant is awarded, do we need to continue it under our fiscal sponsor? So for this question, it seems like when you submit your application, you can let us know about the status of what's going on. And then if you are awarded funds, we can cross that bridge when we contact you to set up the contract during the contract negotiation period. We'll provide more details if that's a bridge we have to cross at that time. Let's see if I can find other questions. I think that's all the questions I can answer for right now. So I will close by pointing you back to, if you have other questions, please send them to the email on the screen that I'm going to highlight. Before close of business this Wednesday, October 28th. Thank you so much for participating in our webinar. Apologies again for some of our technical difficulties, and we wish you the best of luck in your application for the Grants and Aid funds. This is Gabe Niole from the Department of Community Services, signing off.